Are you guys hearing this? Excellent. All right, great. This is like high technology here. Very cool. All right, and I think we're maybe pretty close to getting started here. All right, so we're just waiting for Federico.
I'm here.
Okay. Great. Put that up on the screen. So I'm going to start with the PowerPoint, and I'm going to use that for a little bit, and then we'll go to Skype as our third speaker. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you to everybody for coming. I am Bill Adair. I am the Knight Professor of Journalism and Public Policy at Duke University. This is my second time at the International Journalism Festival. I came before as the creator of PolitiFact, the fact-checking website in the United States, and I am here also as in that role as the creator, and I continue to be contributing editor to PolitiFact, and I'll be talking a little bit about PolitiFact today. We're going to be talking about new story forms, which is a particular passion of mine and a passion of the other members on our panel. And so I thought I would start by introducing our great panel today and then give you a little bit of an introduction about new story forms and a concept that we call structured journalism, which is something that has become something of a crusade for several of us, and we hope that you're going to want to join us in this crusade. And we're going to, each of us will make some presentations, and then we'll open it up for some questions from you, and hopefully have an interesting discussion and be a little bit provocative today. So let me introduce the panel. My Twitter handle is Bill Adair Duke, if you want to tweet anything about me. Joining us today also is Laura Amico. Laura is the creator of HomicideWatch and is currently, and has recently been a Nieman Fellow and is currently working on a project in Boston. I forget the name of it. It's called
Learning Lab.
Learning Lab, and Laura will be telling us about that. And on my right is Martin B. Lamb, who is the editor of New Formats, one of the coolest titles around at the Trinity Mirror. Martin's Twitter handle is his name, Martin B. Lamb. Am I pronouncing that correct?
Yeah, that's
B.
very
Lamb?
good. That's very good.
And then joining us by Skype, actually Federico is first here. On our far right is Federico Guerini. Federico is a freelance journalist, served most recently as a fellow at the Reuters Institute, and you can see his Twitter handle there.
Okay, thank you.
And then joining us by Skype is Reg Chua, who is an editor at Reuters and who is the founder and editor of the Structured Journalism blog. And you can see his Twitter handle there. So after those short introductions, let me talk a little bit about story forms, and then each of our panelists are going to talk for a little bit, and then we're going to mix it up. So hopefully this will be a nice, thought-provoking conversation. So I want to start by framing our conversation by noting that we are at an incredible moment in human history. We are at a point when we can reinvent how we publish information. And I think we forget that, particularly those of us who are in or recently been in the legacy media. You know, there's a tendency, I've recently left the newspaper business, have a lot of friends who are still in the newspaper business, and there's a tendency to mourn what's happening in the newspaper business, to mourn what's happening in the television business. And I think we forget this is an incredible moment in human history, a moment of opportunity to reinvent how we communicate, how we communicate the news. And we here, all of us, are taking part in the wholesale reconstruction of how humans get their news. You know, if you think about it, fundamentally, all of us probably have iPhones or Android devices. You know, I put up there some of the more frivolous news things I could find in the last couple of days. But really think about the kinds of ways that we're getting news today that didn't exist 5 years ago. My daughter texted me the other day, wanted some information on Cliven Bundy. Cliven Bundy, you may know, is this character out in the western United States whose cows have been grazing on federal land, and he's against the federal government even though his cows have been freeloading on federal land, eating grass that is owned by the federal government. And so my daughter wanted a fact check on that. So I directed her to Vox, the new website by Ezra Klein, and she immediately started texting me, "This is amazing, this is great, this is just what I needed." And Ezra has created this great thing called Stacks, where you have cards that explain how things work, and it's structured journalism. It was a great explainer for her. Those sorts of things didn't exist just a few years ago, those sorts of websites. And so we need to appreciate the moment we're in. And I think it's really, we're at the point that our grandchildren will ask us, you were around when BuzzFeed was invented? It's a really different, amazing time. And in spite of that, I think we need to recognize that many news organizations are still telling stories the old way. They are taking print stories and just pasting them in pixels. And I would say, even though a lot of us are coming from the new media world, and a lot of us are here because we're from the new media world, the vast majority of the news that is being consumed is just print stories pasted in pixels or television stories pasted in pixels. So I want to quickly show you just a few examples of what we're talking about when we say structured journalism. So here is the old way. And if you think of it like a database, here's a New York Times story, and really this New York Times story has just two fields, headline and text, just two fields. And now here is a PolitiFact fact check. Now here's just three of the fields: speaker, Rush Limbaugh; statement, rating. And now here's a little more from that fact check: speaker, Rush Limbaugh; statement, the date, that's another field; the headline, that's an SEO headline written for search engine optimization; the text of the story; the rating. Then if you look over on the right side of it, the date that he said it is a field, the subject tag is a field, and the sources are all one field. So lots of things now, think of it as a database, lots of things that we can sort and tally to gather information from to give a reader freedom. The reader can now look things up. We're putting the reader in charge with this structured journalism. So say the reader says, hey, I want to look up Rush Limbaugh's record on PolitiFact. Does he tell a lot of falsehoods? What do you think? So here's Rush Limbaugh's record, and gosh, that's surprising. Rush Limbaugh tells a lot of falsehoods. You can see he has 7 false ratings and 6 pants on fire ratings. And because it is structured journalism, that can be tallied automatically. You can also say, hey, database, show me all pants on fire ratings for Rush Limbaugh. And because he has so many, there they are, all of the pants on fire ratings, which is the most ridiculous falsehoods for Rush Limbaugh. That is possible because the data, the story, the fact checks are structured. If we had just presented them like a blog post, like an old news story, they would not have shown up this way. So let me just quickly gloss over a couple others. Here's how we define a few concepts in structured journalism. Each story or entry has many fields, as I just showed you. Another thing about structured journalism, it allows the narrative or characters to be described in different ways. In other words, you could see the tally of Rush Limbaugh's truth-o-meter counts. You could say, show me all of his pants on fire ratings. It gives the storyteller more flexibility. It allows the editors to display the information in different ways. It puts the reader in charge. So with that, I want to turn it over to Laura, who's going to talk a little bit about HomicideWatch.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you all for being here to share this conversation with us. I hope we can. We have lots of time to engage with questions as we move forward. This is, without a doubt, the most beautiful space I have ever spoken in. And if you haven't yet, I would invite you to take a look at the ceiling, because I think that it's actually quite special. I was in here a couple sessions ago, and I was looking at it and admiring the paint. And then I started looking at the structure of it, and the arches that are along the walls, and the buttresses that hold up the ceiling. And I started thinking about the space that we were in, and how that structure creates this space for us all to be here, sharing this conversation, sharing what we love, and talking about the future. I think that that's really, really special. And it's the space that provides the opportunity for us to do that. And so, for me, when I think about journalism, and the best of what I love about journalism, it's journalism like this room, that has this structure that holds everything together, that creates a space for us to be in, and a space for us to be together, to share, and to tell a story, just as this room tells a story. Now, if you were to look at HomicideWatch, and it's HomicideWatch that I'm most known for, although I'm going to be speaking about our new project, Learning Lab, today too. It's a site about homicide. It's a site about murder, about crime, and about a lot of sadness. And a beautiful space like this isn't necessarily what you'd likely think about when you look at HomicideWatch. And yet what I see every day in the space that we've created is actually exactly this. We see people who don't know one another, who don't have any connection to one another, coming together to share their experiences as friends and families of victims and suspects, of neighbors on streets where crimes happen, as bus drivers, as teachers, as social workers, as police officers and detectives, judges, attorneys, and all others who make up our community. And really, what HomicideWatch does is it puts them in this space. Gianluca Constantini, if I'm saying his name correctly, and I hope I am, did these wonderful illustrations, I don't know if you've seen them, of the speakers here at this conference. And when I saw mine, I was actually quite pleased, because he drew me holding a notebook. And this is what I do in my day-to-day life, more often than I do this. I'm a reporter. I'm out most days with my notebook and my pen. I'm doing interviews, I'm talking to people, I'm writing stories, usually on deadline, and I am publishing and reading comments and approving comments and being a reporter. Next slide. Thank you. This is HomicideWatch. And if you're looking at this now, you probably think that, no, this isn't much like this beautiful space that we're in. But the structure underneath HomicideWatch very much is. Now, HomicideWatch is daily beat reporting of the sort that you do as shown in that picture, with a notebook and a pen. You're not allowed in the US, in many cases, to bring your computer into the courtroom, so it's very much analog reporting. And yet HomicideWatch is something that is born of the web. The stories are traditional stories. They're mostly inverted pyramids. They're written very quickly. Most of them, in fact, are news briefs. But we do more with those stories than simply publishing them in a roundup or page B3 or something like that. In fact, what we do is we pull the data out of those daily stories. We look at the underlying structure of them, and we look at what is repetitive between stories. Let me give you an example. A homicide has a time and a date. It also has a place. These are constants for every case. A victim has a name, an age, a mother or father, a gender, a date of birth, a date of death, a history. These are constants for every victim, and the same for every suspect. And so the structure of HomicideWatch, where we create the space, is in looking at what is the same between people and between cases, and using that to better understand what is different between them too. If the internet works, I'd like to do a little demonstration. Bill, if you wouldn't mind clicking on, uh-oh.
Yep, we can do it.
We'll get it back. On a victim page. Any of them will do, just the photos across the top. Now the victim pages and the suspect pages, and every victim and every suspect has their own page on HomicideWatch. And we promise every homicide, from crime to conviction, in the 4 cities where we run HomicideWatch sites. And these pages are stories in and of themselves. And I think that these really show the story form that is HomicideWatch and is structured journalism. You see on these pages everything we know about a case. We see the photo of the person, if we have one. If we don't have a photo, you see that we don't have one. We see the map of where the crime happened. We see some data, biographical details about who they are, who the detective is assigned to the case, their phone number. And then we see the series of stories, the narrative that takes us through the journey of when this crime happened, moving forward to understand how the criminal justice system has worked in this case. Now, what's important about HomicideWatch is that the structure is less about the text of the individual story and more about the general aspects of the beat. As I said, the date, the time, the place of the homicide, the name, the age, the race, the gender of the victim and suspect, who the detective is assigned to the case, the charges, the attorneys, and the sentencings. For a long time, we've looked for the right words to describe what we do with HomicideWatch. And Bill has called it several things. Chris, my husband, and I, we're co-founders of the site, have called it several things. Chris called it frameworks for reporting for a long time. And what I like about that is that it gets at that structure of building those walls in order to hang the stories off of and build community between. I've called it narrative data, and as Bill said, Reg calls it structured journalism. They all work, and I think none is more perfect than the other. But we are looking for something that unifies these projects because we think there is a lot in common. What works about HomicideWatch and what makes it structural is the realization that everything is relational, that the data comes out of the daily beat reporting, that the questions stay the same from story to story until we know how the questions are different in each story. We understand that the time relates to the date, relates to the place, relates to the name, and so on and so forth. And we understand that from case to case, those questions and those data points build context. And for me, context is simply another word for structure. They're the way we understand the universe that we're covering. This means a couple things for reporters and editors and newsrooms. One, it means that we're able to use our daily beat reporting in a way that builds resources over time. It means we're able to use our daily beat reporting in a way that asks better questions. And it means we're able to use our daily beat reporting in a way that answers the needs of our community. Now, by answering these 3 questions, it also means that it makes that daily beat reporting and all that other reporting cheaper and more efficient. I know the editors in the room like that. The big win here, though, is that it builds journalism that is more meaningful for communities. And it does that through empathy. What HomicideWatch did well is that it outlined the beat by its structure and asked then, what jobs are our community members trying to do within this room? And we saw a couple things. We saw that they were trying to mourn, they were trying to remember, they were trying to follow cases, they were trying to understand whether or not their neighborhoods were safe, but more than that, they were wondering if their criminal justice system was working. And by identifying these needs, these jobs, we were able to answer them by altering the structure of the site and altering how people use the news on the site. Key to this really is our mission statement. Mark every death, remember every victim, follow every case. And that's at the top of the site, and it's a promise. And it helps our readers hold us accountable and understand who we are and what we want to do. Can I have my next slide, please?
Can you put us back up?
Go back.
Oh, I'm sorry. Everybody's looking at my email. Any particular messages anybody thinks I should respond to? Okay. Where are we? There we go. Well, hang on here. Is that not?
It should be the next one.
Okay, I'm not seeing. Okay, because what I'm seeing on my screen, there we go. That one.
There we go. So you're going to see in a minute our metrics. And HomicideWatch in DC has been active we've been publishing for 4 years now. There we go. And you see just this incredible bump in growth. Starting about a year ago, we're up to about 500,000 page views a month now with one full-time equivalent reporter. Those are really good metrics for a newsroom. 500,000 page views for one reporter. Those 500,000 page views are from about 70,000 uniques each month. And again, that's a really good number. What I like about those numbers, though, is the engagement that it shows. Those pages per visit is really high. The average here, if we see, is 5.6. Now, we're able to achieve that high level of page views per visit because people are delving through the structure of the site. They understand the pathways, and they understand what I'm asking of them. The same as this room is asking that you sit here and listen and engage in this conversation, and we hope ask questions. I'll take the next one. These are our interns in DC, and they're an incredible group of young journalists who are responsible for the day-to-day operations of the site. We now have sites in DC, Chicago in partnership with the Sun-Times, Trenton, New Jersey in partnership with the Trentonian, and Boston in partnership with Northeastern University. And in many of those cities, it's young journalists who are doing this journalism. It's building incredible community around the sites. We get a lot of comments like this of people just reaching out, trying to engage, using that space that we're creating. This is what we're trying to do on Learning Lab, too. Now, Learning Lab isn't about crime, it's about education. And it's a very different topic. From when we first started thinking about HomicideWatch, every editor we talked to said, yeah, homicide's great, can you do this with education? And Chris and I fought that for a long time. About a year ago, we finally said, okay, we'll try. And so we're trying to build these structures around covering education reform in Massachusetts. And we're doing it by starting the same way we started HomicideWatch, by doing some empathy mapping, by looking at the jobs to be done, and by looking at the structure of the beat and the information and building out from there.
Great. Well, let's move to Reg. Reg, can you hear me? Great. Can we put his audio up from the Skype? Great. Reg, try again.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you good. All right, Reg, tell us where you are.
Okay. I'm in Barcelona in a hotel room, I'm afraid. I'm sure I would much rather be where you guys all are, especially if you already started drinking. I don't know if you're going to be able to see anything of Connected China, but if you can't, I would urge you all to go to connectedchina.reuters.com. I'll try and keep this short, given I'm at long distance and that I can't really show you very much. But so just to take on from where Laura left off, and just to say that the digital information revolution really has changed the way we can do a lot of things. And I know that a lot of what journalists have thought about is that this is just a way of publishing broader and publishing faster. And I think we miss a whole lot of points on this because it really is, in many ways, about the persistence of information, which is why HomicideWatch is really about as much old information as much as it is new information, and PolitiFact is about old information as it is about new information, which is why you can see how many times Rush Limbaugh has lied in the past. So it's about that persistence of information and about the automatization of information that can be reconstituted. I think that's really at the heart of what we're thinking about on structured journalism. The other two parts of it, I think, are really about how people's behavior has changed, which is that people come to information when they want it, not when we want to publish it. And if we want to serve them well, we should really be thinking about how we can create structures for them to answer questions when they want them answered, not, again, when we write them. And I think if we succeed in doing that, I think we help crack one of the other problems, which is the business model. How do we make the content that we create have longer shelf life, more value, and at the same time, how do we extract, if you like, more value out of the daily beat reporting, which again, Laura had spoken about. So just to talk about the one example that we built on this one at Reuters is something called Connected China. And there was a series of reasons why we built it. One, it was of public interest. It was built essentially over 2 years leading up to the transition leadership in China. It was as much a proof of concept and a test of a theory that this could be done. It was a bit of an experiment in a business model. And it was also an exploration, frankly, about cultural change in a newsroom. What could we get to do to get people to do this sort of thing? I'm not going to give myself grades on any of those things. I don't think we were successful in all fronts, but I think we built a fairly nice product. So the idea really here was we wanted to look at people, relationships, and institutions. So what we did was we built a database almost entirely around the notion of what is a person or an entity and what relationships do they have. So, if so-and-so is the son of, we built that as a relationship. We said they were close to someone or they were a mentor to someone, we put that in a database. We also managed to be able to use that same structure to say, where did they go to school? So that would be another relationship. So a person is one entity, a university is another entity, and attending that university from a certain date to a certain date is another relationship. And so as a result of that, we could build this website that really had a number of very different views. One view was to say, what are the relationship of the key leaders in China to each other, and you can look at them over 1 degree of separation, 2 degrees of separation. It's an entirely graphical representation of it with a lot of text, a lot of words that can be sorted in any number of ways. The second thing we did was we created, in effect, the org chart of China. We looked at the military, we looked at the party, and we looked at the government. And by being able to create these structures around entities, parts of government, which part of the government reports to what other part, who are the members, and so on, you could explore your way through the Chinese government structure, which by itself was already a fairly complex thing, and see the membership of each of the bodies that ran the Chinese government. And then the third thing we could do as a result of that was we could track people's career track. And the good thing about China was that they had a very hierarchical system. And so with that career track, so people moved in a very specific rate into sort of more senior positions. And so by doing that, we could see how fast someone was rising, and you could identify people who were on the fast track or people who had essentially had topped out in their position in the government. we have a few other things as well. We wrote stories. We built a timeline that had video from the 1930s and so on. So it became a sort of a fully rich site. But the really interesting thing about all of this was that a single database powered all of those visualizations. It allowed us to be able to sort of take one database, show off social power, show off membership in government organizations, show off career track, and then we made sure that we kept that up to date. So if someone changed their position, one single update to that database would then power everything again. So it was really this experiment in being able to sort of update information, keep a site current all the time, rethink the presentation of information. And again, if you go to the site, you'll see what I mean. It was to rethink workflow and to see whether we could get sort of more of the beat reporters to work on these things. And I have to say on that front, that's more of a work in progress. And finally, it was to sort of rethink the value of persistent information that we collected once and we could show multiple times over and over again. So, you know, I do hope you go look at it. I think it's a really interesting place in where this is. I think, you know, as we go forward, I'm still trying to think through other ways we can take information like this and perhaps start using machine generation of stories or machine generation of information. That's the next project I think I'm going to try and work on. But so far this is it, and I hope you have a look at it.
That's great, Reg. Thank you, and I'm sorry that we've been unable to show the site while you've been talking, because I know everybody here would really benefit from seeing it. So let's pause with you, and we're going to go to Martin and Federico, and then hopefully come back to you and talk a little bit about ConnectedChina, and hopefully we can demo it. So I'm going to move you over here, and except that I can't move you. He won't go away.
Stop.
All right.
Oh, no.
So is there a way to change screens, guys? Okay, so let's go to Martin. So Martin, why don't you start by telling everybody what you do at the Mirror? Because what I was fascinated by was the idea that a tabloid would have a new media person, and how a tabloid tries to play in the world of new media in the kind of cheeky way that tabloids do.
Yeah, so I wish I had the simple answer to that. So Trinity Mirror publishes one of the best-selling tabloid newspapers in the UK. It's the Daily Mirror. It's kind of left-leaning politically, and as a company has probably historically underinvested in digital, and a couple of years ago kind of realized that they, you know, if they didn't start playing catch up, they were really in difficulty as a business. And one of the things that we wanted to try and do was find a way of reaching an audience that wouldn't necessarily come to Trinity Mirror properties. So as well as the national paper, it owns a lot of regional papers. And so what we set out to do was a couple of experimental projects to try some new ways of publishing and to try some new types of content. And what we were particularly interested in, having seen the success of sites like BuzzFeed, was could we tap into that social sharing where the imperative for driving traffic isn't search engine optimization, it isn't that kind of thing, it's building things that people really, really want to share. And so our the first site we did was called Us versus Them. And we did it really, really quickly as well, which was also quite unusual for a media company. We had a workshop to kind of come up with the idea for the site, and we hired an editor that we wanted to work with, and another guy, and we kind of got it designed and built and launched within 5 weeks. And one of the ways we managed to get that done was by ignoring the content management system that we have as the big business, and instead we just started publishing on Tumblr. One of the things we were looking was to reach a new, younger audience, and given that Tumblr already has millions of young people enjoying the web there, why wouldn't you start publishing there rather than trying to drag them to the new property that you built. And I really, really want to show the thing. So we launched with I'm going to make Bill play a couple of games in a minute. He's going to hate me. So one of our original plans was that in order to try and build an audience for this, we needed to get it popular with people who could distribute it. So quite early on, we had a strategy of deliberately trying to tease and annoy mainstream media. So this was one of the first things that we launched. And you know the New York Times...
You're going after the mainstream media?
Well, for the first couple of weeks. One of the first things, you know, Snowfall. So we made Ice Veil, which was this kind of interactive piece, very immersive, and basically explaining, you know, this thing with snow and ice, and it's one of these scrolly parallax things, and then you get here, and suddenly the AT-ATs start appearing out of the snow, and it kind of, and it just basically turns into, well, a kind of the Battle of Hoth, and then gets a bit sweary, and also trolled Star Wars fans, because obviously they're not robots. So the idea was to make something that was very, very funny, and that people would share, because they would go, oh, these guys have done this thing. And we actually, there was one named person who works at another media organization, who I won't name now, but basically we decided that if she shared one of our that we were funny, and we'd appeal to media people, and we hadn't been sexist, and so those were our criteria for the first couple of weeks. And so what we do is we do a blog that kind of rounds up funny things on the internet, and then tries to do our own take on it. And then we make these games, and some of the games have kind of got a bit of a political edge to them. So we made this. In the UK, we have, there's a new government policy that if you've been unemployed for 2 years or more, you have to go to a job centre every single day to sign on, and you also have to do unpaid voluntary work as well. And it's sort of, I think, you know, the idea is it makes it intolerable to be unemployed. But if you think if you're in a rural area and you've only got something like £76 to live on a week anyway as your job seekers allowance, now you're spending £20 and 2 hours a day going to this office and back. But anyway, lots of people wrote about it and nobody cared, but we made it into a game. So Ian Duncan Smith is the minister who brought this policy in, and he's very, very posh. And the idea was that this poor little miserable man has to run between job interviews that he doesn't get, and then has to get back to the job centre before the time runs out, and needs to get home to feed his family, and then he's got to go and do his unpaid, but he's got to go and do another job interview. And then, because this is basically how the policy works, it's making people run around to a point where they can't possibly do it anymore. And magically, at that point, the government can sanction you, take away your job seekers allowance, and you also disappear off the unemployment figures as well. So it's a win all round for the government, because it saves them money and the figures look better. And so we started doing these games that really quickly in response to topical events. So there's another thing in the UK that badgers. Do you have badgers in Italy? Badgers, black and white stripy mammals. And apparently they give cows tuberculosis, a disease. Farmers don't like this, the cows die, we can understand that. And the answer in the UK has been to cull the badgers. But lots of people love badgers because they look really, really cute, and they don't really want the badgers to be culled. And so a lot of people are opposed to the policy, and of course, government being government, it's been completely inept. And so a minister had to come up and say, we said we were going to kill 4,000 badgers, but we only killed 2,000 badgers, but the policy is still a success. And the journalist in the press conference said, are you moving the goalposts, which is, you know, an English phrase for are you changing what you're aiming for? And the minister beautifully said, no, it's the badgers that have moved the goalposts. And that was too good. So in the space of a couple of hours, we launched Owen Patterson's badger penalty shootout. And so basically, you kind of have to kick the, oh, no, the badgers beat me. And we did that in a couple of hours. And the reason I think that is an interesting example of a new story form is it mocks the government, and we also had to judge how quickly we would launch it. So, you know, if it's a penalty shootout, really, we probably should have made it that you took 5 penalties, and probably the badgers took penalties, and there's no sound on it, and so the game was really not finished. But basically, it's just a one-line joke, isn't it? He said this ridiculous thing. And so you kick the ball once, and we've got these really prominent, like, try again or share it with your friends at the point where you're still laughing about the joke. So instead of over-engineering it, we kind of just got something that people would really want to share. And then we had Super Tory Boy, which is really in-depth, took us a couple of weeks. And again, it's basically, you know, it's his version of the British Prime Minister trying to slash public services and crush people. And it's basically, it's a little platform game, and you can pick the finance minister or Boris as Mayor of London, and they say silly, it's basically Mario, and that's the Conservative Party logo disguised as a tree, and eventually there's a demonic vision of Margaret Thatcher appears in the clouds.
How many
one
players? How many players would play this?
A few thousand. No, actually, I mean, our bigger games, it gets up to 1 million. But so what I like about this, apart from the fact that it's funny, is that people share it because it allows them to make a political statement without being that boring politics guy on Facebook. So basically, when you share this game, it kind of says, I know where to find cool, funny stuff on the internet, and also, I hate the government, but I kind of didn't have to go, oh, you know, do you want to go on this campaign with me? It kind of gets people to express a feeling. With Amped, we've tried to take some of those lessons and apply it to perhaps more traditional data journalism. And so if we can get the browser back on the screen, we did this, which was kind of, I guess, much more of a popular subject. So Wayne Rooney signed a new contract for Manchester United for an unfeasibly silly amount of money. And we just made a really, really simple counter that just, I don't know when Bill loaded the page, but basically that's it. That's him earning money in real time. And then as you scroll down, it's kind of like, that's it compared to the British Prime Minister, who I guess most people think is well paid. And that's it compared to a nurse in the same period of time. And you can also, you know, put your own salary in, which I won't do, because obviously that would go faster than Wayne Rooney.
Let's do one more, and then we'll move on to Federico.
Yeah. So the idea is really trying to do things that you couldn't do in print. So if you've ever seen early television from the 20s or 30s, basically they filmed people making radio programs. People come up to the mic and they step back and there's a band in the background. And I think a lot of what we've done on the web for the last 20 years has basically been doing articles that you could have printed out or packages that you could have put on television. And we're really just trying to find things that you can do that tell a story that you couldn't do in the paper or you couldn't do on TV. And that's really been kind of the driving force behind them. And trying to do data journalism with a tabloid sensibility, which sometimes means making it slightly more fun than it is accurate, which I know is irritating if you're very keen on accuracy. But there's been a few things where we've kind of sort of got halfway through the math. So we tried to calculate how much it was going to cost you to fill your Panini World Cup sticker book with stickers. And it's kind of, you can work out one number, which is the cost of the stickers to fill the book. And then you can do some complicated maths to say probability in this. And then in the end, our article just sort of throws its hands up and says, but you're having fun collecting the stickers, so who cares? And it's something that people share a lot, because they either share because it's more expensive than they think it's going to be, or because it's fun. And so that's what we've been trying to do, tabloid journalism that's fun.
That's great. Well, thank you. Let's turn to Federico. So Federico, why don't you just talk a little bit about, you saw one project that you really liked recently, and I can put it up on the screen quickly, and we'll go through it a little bit.
The Catalonia, okay. Well, yes, thank you, Bill. Well, I think I was trying to give a continental perspective, so we don't have anything this entertaining like Martin showed, but we have some real interesting experiences of newspapers that are trying to use new languages, following a bit the snowfall thread, but maybe even trying to improve in it. One thing I think it's quite interesting is a project made by a newspaper from Catalonia, actually, from Spain, Catalonia, the ARA CAT, which is a small newspaper. It's actually 60,000 copies circulation. It is has an interesting digital department, which is doing really nice things. This one is, for instance, is a summary of what happened in last year, in 2013. And they used infographics, videos, interviews to try to tell in an engaging way 3 main topics, which are the referendum for autonomy in Catalonia, which for the leadership is very important, of course. The ATUR, which is Catalonian slang for unemployment, and spying, the espionage, which is the Datagate, the Snowden issue. And they developed it in a format which is reminiscent somehow of Snowfall or Firestorm by The Guardian or other experiences, but a bit more complex. With the navigation is scrolling with the mouse and the arrows, and you give access to content on different multimedia formats, like interviews. This is a screenshot, of course. They don't move, they don't speak, but these 3 guys on the bottom, they actually are speaking about their experience and why they think they are in favor or not of the autonomy of Catalonia. And while on the top, they put some statistics and some surveys about what the population thinks, why they should choose autonomy instead of remaining part of Spain. Then, if you can scroll, thank you. And then they also use this kind of illustration to try to give such complex subjects like the Datagate, which is very difficult to understand at a glance, to give you an overview, a quick overview of what's happening and how the problem evolved. We can go further, and the other element, of course, is text, which is, though it's not dominant as in other experiences. For instance, the New York Times, of course, showed the way, and the Snowfall was very important, but it was still dominated by text. Whereas this kind of formats, the text is just something that adds value, but it's not the only language. They use figures, pictures, and videos all together, and they try to assemble this content in an interactive way.
It's very impressive. I mean, when I looked at it, it's really well done.
Really well.
Do you think that it tells the story completely? I mean, one of the risks in this kind of thing is it tells just one piece of something. Does it tell you everything you need to know?
Well, of course, I had to read in Catalan, so it wasn't that easy. But I had the feeling they did a great effort. Mm-hmm. They tried to cover all the main points of the. Of course, it's not perfect, but I think it's really impressive, and it's also impressive because it's done by a small newspaper.
Right.
You can also this kind of recap at the end. You have the different main topics, and you can also narrow the selection.
Right.
And this is instead from France. It's the L'Equipe, which is a sport magazine. It's doing something called Explore, and I think it's interesting because they use this format to tell the epic of sport. I mean, it's not performance, it's not the result. It's not who wins, actually, but it's a kind of long-form journalism done through images, of course, and illustration, whatever. And to give you an example, one of their features is called Le Combat de la Vie, the fight of life. So it's not only on the desktop, but it's thought to be experienced partly on a desktop and partly on the second screen, which is the tablet or the smartphone.
Right.
Well, this is the first one I did. It's about an alpinist. It's not that one, but the following slides, not this one. Okay.
Here.
You have the video, and you have also, you are warned that you have also on the second screen, you can have more content. And when on the video a small symbol appears, you can go to check on your device. And you actually have some more, you go more in depth, you have some more side stories, no? This is a story about two sportsmen who also went to fight wars, one in Afghanistan and another in Lebanon. So the fight of life is both their previous experience as a sport, hockey, I think, and then in war. So it's they're using these two devices to give two different perspectives and give the whole picture, assembling them. So I think it's quite interesting.
All right, so here's something I want to ask each of you. Reg, can you hear me? Can we get audio from Skype? Reg, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Great. So here's a question I'm going to ask each of you. So this is cool stuff, everything that we've been talking about here. Can you build a standalone business with a new form of journalism and make it work? And this is partly a referendum for you to answer whether something like PolitiFact and HomicideWatch can stand alone as a business and ConnectedChina, or do these things have to be part of a bigger news organization and a feature of a bigger news organization like Reuters? What do you think?
If you're asking, look, I think that it's entirely possible to build a standalone business, but I'm not sure it would be journalism. So there's a company out there called, I think, Relationship Science. They probably have, I forget what it is, 80 million in venture cap funds, and they're trying to build a huge database of people, not unlike ConnectedChina, except they're trying to do it for financial people around the world. Their goal, clearly, $8 million of investor money is to have a database that they can sell. Is that journalism? Not quite. But can you build a business out of collecting data and thinking about customers that would want it and who would pay for it? Yes. But I don't think that this is really kind of the goal of what we're looking at, although it'd be nice to make a lot of money and get $80 million in funding. It's really to talk about how, in the course of doing some of the other kinds of journalism we do, we can repurpose some of that, or in the course of doing this, we can also create some public interest journalism. So I think the real value here potentially is in the synergy between coverage and data. And I don't want to talk about them in two different terms, as in you write some stories, that's your real journalism, and you get some data and you do something else. What I mean is that the rethinking of journalism into some measure of stories, some measure of data, some measure of reconstituted information, I think creates enough value. Maybe it's not enough all by itself to build a completely standalone business, but I think it can really help push the boundaries of sustainability.
Great. What do you guys think?
I mean, I think one thing with us versus them is we've started doing sponsored games, so kind of like native content type games. We would have had to have burned a lot of our own cash to get there without the support from the big business. But then it also feeds other things back in. So, and I mean, Italy is classic for this, where, compared to somewhere like the States, you're a reasonably compact country, but regional differences are really, really important, and the regions have very distinctive characters. And the UK is the same. People will fight over the slightest difference in accent, if you're on one side of the river or another. And we made a game about basically how north in the country you lived, how northern you were. And people were getting, I'm 100% northern, and adding their own, thank God, when they were tweeting it. and also other people getting I'm 0% Northern and adding thank God when they tweeted it because people didn't want to be associated with Northernness. And basically the regional newspapers have now adapted that quiz to make even more micro versions of it. So how Welsh are you? How Newcastle are you? And so we're putting code back into the business. And I think if you always think news organizations did a bundle, like the newspaper has the crossword in it and a cartoon, and you know your TV news bulletin has a finally thing about, you know, a funny donkey or whatever the story is.
Standalone business?
Standalone business. I think you could do it, but I think it would be hard to raise the money. I think, yeah, it would be hard to raise the money.
I'm curious about, okay, so sponsored games, cool idea, but do the Lib Dems sponsor the game against the Tories?
If they had enough if they had the money, we'd be happy to do it. No, we've been doing stuff with kind of, you know, commercial brands.
Whole new things to chew over at an ethics session.
Well, I think the church and state separation was a lovely thing in 1862 or whenever it was that it actually worked. I'm not bothered about that. I think, you know, people want to get paid, and I think if we make a few games for a brand of crisps, it doesn't mean when we're making a serious point at the government that, you know, about the government that it's undermined.
Right,
I think
sure.
I think people can tell the difference. I think the audience is more sophisticated.
Yeah. Federico, what do you think? Can you build a standalone business around these new story forms?
Well, I think it's very hard. But the problem, you spoke about Italy before, that the market is small, so it's difficult to have such a readership that gives you enough money, no, to get by. As long as you do it with an English website or an English readership, yes. But for doing the same thing in Italy would be very difficult.
I mean, what's interesting in all of the examples we've shown, including your site, Reg, I didn't see a single ad except on PolitiFact, right?
HomicideWatch has ads.
Did it? Okay.
Yeah. I think the interesting...
Have you got ad blocker on there? Is that what it is?
Possibly. I think the interesting thing from what Martin said is that games like he showed us create not only multiple revenue streams, but multiple diversified assets. I really love the idea of the sponsored games. I think that probably works really well for you. What I'm more interested, though, is what you are able to learn about your audience that that sponsor is then sponsoring. For example, are you able to capture the information about income that those gamers are putting in, or which finance minister they're selecting, and then use that to better shape your coverage going forward, and then build better assets throughout your company based on that one individually sponsored game. So that is compounding your assets and your business over time.
I wonder if, for instance, with HomicideWatch, you could have some revenue streams coming, I don't know, selling this data to saying people want to live in an area where their homicide rate is very low or stuff like this. You can use this data on other fields aside from journalism.
Exactly. I think that one thing that HomicideWatch showed us is how well, when we create a structured site for a very particular audience, how well we are able to then interact with that audience, to read that audience, and then to better provide what they're actually looking for and not what we assume they're looking for. That is to say, we're better able to identify them and identify ourselves and identify the meeting place where our interests collide.
All right, let's take some questions from the audience. Do we have a microphone? Is there a microphone for questions?
And I see one right here in the middle. If you'll just wait for the microphone. I think we're probably recording,
yeah,
so
I see
the
a
mic will help.
camera in the back, so.
Which is to say, watch what you say.
Yeah.
Bill, you said in your introduction that you're on a bit of a crusade. Can you maybe explain where you're heading with that crusade, and also what it is exactly that you understand what you mean when you say structured journalism?
You bet.
Thanks.
And Laura and Reg can speak up too. So we met in February at Reg's office in New York, and we feel like a lot of journalists are missing this opportunity to do great things with structured journalism, to do things like HomicideWatch and ConnectedChina and create new kinds of journalism. And so what we decided we would do, and what's wonderful about working with Laura, is at the end of our meeting, Laura says, all right, what's our 12-month plan? And whereas I think Reg and I would have been content to just go back to our jobs and write a blog post. And so we came out of it with a 12-month plan that said what we're going to do is do panels like this and write as much as we can to encourage other journalists to do the kinds of things and to try to suggest topics where other journalists could do things. So we have some ideas that we've started to do kind of some demos, and I have an idea of medical studies where you could build a structured journalism project around medical studies that I've sort of been tinkering around with. And we're gonna have a kind of pre-meeting of journalists at the Online News Association conference in Chicago in September. And we're trying to write about it every chance we get. So, and we just really want people to look for opportunities to do this. It's challenging because it takes a commitment. I mean, basically, we're saying create a new form of journalism and try it. If you have a beat, and maybe your beat's covering medicine, or maybe your beat is covering politics, or maybe your beat is covering sports, look for ways to do it. I didn't get to. There's a cool one that got created without us, without even them hearing from us, called Rookie.com, that Laura's husband, Chris, who's out there, Chris, raise your hand, Chris discovered. And Rookie.com is structured journalism, and it's real simple. All it is quotes about sports, and it's a wonderfully simple way of telling the news of sports through quotes. So our crusade is, we're going to try to get you guys to create new structured journalism, and we hope create new things like this. And we hope we can give people advice about how to build a content management system if you need one. That's Chris's expertise. And then how to develop it. We'd love to do it. And we're not looking to make $1 million doing this. We're looking to be, pro bono. We're starting a religion, not a corporation.
I mean, my understanding of this, just to really give a concrete example of it, is that as the average journalist is not going to be able to make a platform game having a go at the government, but that salary counter, how many stories include some numbers that have a rate of change, and that's all that number is. It's just being able to say, that's how this number grows over time. It's a tiny, tiny little bit of JavaScript, and I think most journalists don't have the skills or the tools to just drop something like that into an article, which I think really, really brings it alive and tells the story better than writing 600 words saying it's outrageous how much he's been paid. It kind of illustrates it much more.
What's been really frustrating for me as a journalist, and again, you saw that illustration of me with a notebook, is I fill up these notebooks, and the notebook is full, and I throw it away. And so little of that information actually makes it into the story, and I know that there's a lot of good information in there. And so structured journalism for me is a way of taking what's in that notebook and putting it to its most efficient use. And that makes me an efficient reporter, it makes me an effective reporter, and it's something that isn't so much about technology as it is about approach. And so I think that that's really what we're advocating for, is a slight shift in the reporters thinking about their approach to the information that they're gathering. An approach that isn't necessarily dependent on technology, but instead on the information gathering and how it's then used. One thing when we talk about evangelizing for this, and I spoke a little bit earlier about what we call it, part of what makes us feel like we need to have these conversations is that we've searched for so long for what to call this. For a long time, HomicideWatch DC was called a hyper-local site. And I'd go, we're covering the entire District of Columbia. There's very little hyper-local about that. And when you look at the Sun-Times running HomicideWatch Chicago, there's very little hyper-local about that. For a while, we called it hyper-topical, but I don't think that really quite gets at the depth of the newness of the story form and the newness of the approach. And so what we're trying to build is a conversation about how we do this, what we call it, and what it looks like going forward. One thing I've been thinking a lot about very briefly is what open structured platforms look like. So for example, if you're familiar with SeeClickFix, it's a terrific website, it's international. It allows you to go to the website or their mobile site and enter a problem you see where you are. For example, there's a pothole in the road. It then channels that information to the appropriate people who are able to then register that there's a pothole in that road and come fix it. I've been thinking a lot about what a structured journalism site like HomicideWatch would look like on an open platform. That is, if it didn't have a reporter behind it, but it had the structure for the community to come in and gather and then share that information and do that reporting. I think it's an interesting idea for taking citizen journalism really to that next level of saying, these are the structures, this is where you gather, this is the pathway, now it's an open place, how do we do it together? So those are the conversations we're looking to have.
Okay, another question? Down here in front? Oh, and I'm sorry.
Prima Laura parlava di come ad HomicideWatch le
I'm sorry, would you
strutture...
stand up so I can see you?
Yes.
Oh, you're there,
I'm
thank
already
you.
standing. Ok, prima Laura parlava di come ad HomicideWatch le strutture che abilitano il racconto delle storie evolvono sulla base dei bisogni degli utenti. Mi farebbe piacere sapere un po' più nel dettaglio come avviene la dinamica di questo processo e di come viene accolta poi dalla parte giornalistica, perché immagino che la dinamica di evoluzione del processo poi si traduce anche in un modo di lavorare differente. Grazie.
Grazie. May I have a translation, please?
How this different structure translates into a way of working, everyday working different? How
Yeah, okay, terrific question. Thank you very much for it. For our reporters, it means that they're working side by side within a database and within a publishing platform. So that means that the first thing they do, for example, they have news of a new homicide. They take those initial details and they put them into the database. The time, the date, the place. From that, they receive an embed code for a map. They take that embed code to WordPress, they put it into their post, and then they write the story. So that when they publish the story, that data point of the new homicide and everything we know about it so far is tied to the website, to the story, and it builds that context. So immediately you're able to look at it and say, wow, this is new, there hasn't been a homicide in this neighborhood for more than 3 years. Or, it's really interesting that there have been 5 homicides within 10 blocks in the past 3 weeks. It builds that context immediately. And it's because the workflow insists that the reporter work side by side in the database and the publishing platform.
All right, another question? Yes.
Is it possible to know something more about the new project on education? Because you started with this, but we are really curious about it.
Thank you, I'd love to. The new project is called Learning Lab. It's with WBUR, which is a radio station in Boston. It's a national public radio station. It's an investment in digital reporting, though, because it is primarily a web project, though it is multi-platform. What we're interested in is where private money is being spent on experiments and innovations in public schools. It's not a large amount of money, but it is an influential amount of money, because successful privately funded projects, we suspect, drive where public money is spent 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So what we're really interested in is how those projects of the future, of how we will learn in the future, start today. And so what we're trying to do is look at what experiments are being done in Massachusetts public schools, what the measures of success are, who's involved in them, and how it's determined whether or not they go forward. Based on how I presented that, I hope you can hear a data structure in your head, that there are repetitive questions that we ask of every project. Who's funding you? For how much? Where are you working? What's your research? What are the grade levels of the children involved? What are the expected outcomes? It's a brand new project. We're about 6 months in now, and we're just in the position of starting to build out those structures and try to find answers to those questions. It's slow going. With homicides, it's easier to collect that information because it's essentially all in one place. It might be difficult to work with your local criminal justice system, with the police department or the courts, but at least you know it's there. With education, what we're learning is the information is much more spread out, and that it's very difficult to understand if you have everything. This is what's making it a challenge. It is a test of this approach. But we've already seen some success with it. We know that these are questions that people in the community have, and they're looking for answers. Thank you.
Great. Other questions?
The question is for Laura and Martin. You've been talking about the new story forms of structured journalism, but with the old media, like a website. Have you ever thought about translate what you do with HomicideWatch and the counters or the games in an application for a mobile device?
So, can I
go ahead,
first?
Sure.
Yeah, sorry. So one of the things is normally if I do presentation slides, I now always, instead of showing screenshots, show a picture of a hand holding a phone with the site on the screen. Because basically in the UK now, apart from between 9 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon, on weekdays when people are chained to their desks, we get more mobile visitors to the Mirror site than desktop visits, and everything we do on Us versus Them and Amped has to work on the phone. I'm absolutely passionate about this. So the Northometer, the peak time for usage was 11 o'clock on a Friday night, which, you know, in the UK we have weird drinking laws, so that's when our pubs close and everybody is just on the streets and they look at their phone and they want something to do. And so we had 20,000 people playing the game, and 85% of them are on their phone, and 85% of them have come from Facebook. And we just basically, if your thing does not work in the screen estate of someone looking at it within the Facebook app, then I think you're dead in the water. I just don't think you're publishing properly. And a thing that really concerns me is the production disconnect, where most people in media offices sit at a desk with a big desktop computer, and that's what you do your publishing on, and the audience is consuming it on this and the small version of the phone. I think that's really worrying. It's like being a director who's making everything in color, but people are only looking at black and white, or vice versa. And actually, sometimes these are a better format to things. So that's if you only take one thing away from this session, everything you do has to work on the phone. It's not a second-class citizen anymore.
Agreed. HomicideWatch is responsive. It's not the be-all, end-all, but it's a good start for us. It's a summer project, I think, if Chris is nodding back there, perhaps to work more on mobile. One of my favorite early moments from HomicideWatch DC, when I was still covering the courthouse every day, was sitting in court and watching the young teenage girls sit there in front of me, and they'd call one of the murder suspects up, and they'd look around and say, "What's he in for? Who's that?" Check HomicideWatch. It was great user testing for me, and it really worked out well. The other thing that I watch is that police in the US are almost exclusively users of Nextel. Nearly no one else uses Nextel. And so I'm able to watch my traffic from police departments based on who my Nextel users are. I love watching my analytics, and those mobile analytics can be really fascinating.
That's great. Somebody else?
We'd love to hear about your projects too, if I may. If you have projects that you think fit this definition or what we've talked about, we'd love to hear about them and have that conversation too.
I have a question for Laura, if I can.
Sure.
The whole concept revolves around empowering the community, okay, the reader. but crime is a very sensitive topic, okay? Death in general. So how do you avoid the dark side of the community empowerment? I mean, the morbid, the...
That's a really good question. One, by moderating our comments extremely carefully. With DC now, being online for 4.5 years, we approve about 95% of our comments, which is actually a really high rate. But it took a lot of work to get to that point. One, we pre-moderate. It is not a volume on any of our sites that we can't manage by pre-moderating. Two, we set firm commenting guidelines, no foul language, no personal threats, the basics, and we hold people to them. Third, I engage with them. If I have a comment come in that I can see has a lot of value to it, I understand what is being said, and there's a lot of value to having it on the site, but it contains the foul language or whatever the problem is. We use Discuss. People register their email address with their comment. Sometimes it's correct, sometimes it's not. I'll take a look at that email address. I'll email them and say, thank you for your comment. I appreciate what you have to say. I would love to include it in our conversation in our community. Here's our commenting guidelines. Would you try again? 9 times out of 10 they do. And that goes to how I really think about Homicide Watch, which is that space. And people want to be a part of that space, but they need to know what to do in it, and they need examples of that. And so, I think of my job as moderating that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you to everybody for coming. Feel free to come up to us afterward if you have other questions or suggestions or anything. And if you're in the United States for ONA in September, please come to our either panel or day ahead, depending on how we do it, or both. And thanks so much, and go out and start a new story forum. Join the crusade. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Reg. And I think we forget that, particularly those of us who are in or recently been in the legacy media. There's a tendency, I've recently left the newspaper business, have a lot of friends who are still in the newspaper business, and there's a tendency to mourn what's happening in the newspaper business, to mourn what's happening in the television business. And I think we forget this is an incredible moment in human history, a moment of opportunity to reinvent how we communicate, how we communicate the news. And we here, all of us, are taking part in the wholesale reconstruction of how humans get their news. If you think about it, fundamentally, all of us probably have iPhones or Android devices. I put up there some of the more frivolous news things I could find in the last couple of days. But really think about the kinds of ways that we're getting news today that didn't exist 5 years ago. My daughter texted me the other day, wanted some information on Cliven Bundy. Cliven Bundy, you may know, is this character out in the western United States whose cows have been grazing on federal land, and he's against the federal government even though his cows have been freeloading on federal land, eating grass that is owned by the federal government. And so my daughter wanted a fact check on that. So I directed her to Vox, the new website by Ezra Klein, and she immediately started texting me, "This is amazing, this is great, this is just what I needed." And Ezra has created this great thing called Stacks, where you have cards that explain how things work, and it's structured journalism. It was a great things now. Think of it as a database, lots of things that we can sort and tally to gather information from to give a reader freedom. The reader can now look things up. We're putting the reader in charge with this structured journalism. So say the reader says, hey, I want to look up Rush Limbaugh's record on PolitiFact. Does he tell a lot of falsehoods? What do you think? So here's Rush Limbaugh's record, and gosh, that's surprising. Rush Limbaugh tells a lot of falsehoods. You can see he has 7 false ratings and 6 pants on fire ratings. And because it is structured journalism, that can be tallied automatically. You can also say, hey, database, show me all pants on fire ratings for Rush Limbaugh. And because he has so many, there they are, all of the pants on fire ratings, which is the most ridiculous falsehoods for Rush Limbaugh. That is possible because the data, the story, the fact checks are structured. If we had just presented them like a blog post, like an old news story, they would not have shown up this way. So let me just quickly gloss over a couple others. Here's how we define a few concepts in structured journalism. Each story or entry has many fields, as I just showed you. Another thing about structured journalism, it allows the narrative or characters to be described in different ways. In other words, you could see the tally of Rush Limbaugh's truth-o-meter counts. You could say, show me all of his pants on fire ratings. It gives the storyteller more flexibility. It allows the editors to display the information in different ways. A bit provocative today. So let me introduce the panel. My Twitter handle is Bill Adair Duke, if you want to tweet anything about me. Joining us today also is Laura Amico. Laura is the creator of HomicideWatch and is currently, and has recently been a Nieman Fellow and is currently working on a project in Boston. I forget the name of it. It's called
Learning Lab.
Learning Lab, and Laura will be telling us about that. And on my right is Martin B. Lamb, who is the editor of New Formats, one of the coolest titles around at the Trinity Mirror. Martin's Twitter handle is his name, Martin B. Lamb. Am I pronouncing that correct?
Yeah, that's
B.
very
Lamb?
good. That's very good.
And then joining us by Skype, actually Federico is first here. On our far right is Federico Guerini. Federico is a freelance journalist, served most recently as a fellow at the Reuters Institute, and you can see his Twitter handle there.
Okay, thank you.
And then joining us by Skype is Reg Chua, who is an editor at Reuters and who is the founder and editor of the Structured Journalism blog. And you can see his Twitter handle there. So after those short introductions, let me talk a little bit about story forms, and then each of our panelists are going to talk for a little bit, and then we're going to mix it up. So hopefully this will be a nice, thought-provoking conversation. So I want to start by framing our conversation by noting that we are at an incredible moment in human history. We are at a point when we can reinvent how we publish information. Explainer for her. Those sorts of things didn't exist just a few years ago, those sorts of websites. And so we need to appreciate the moment we're in. And I think it's really, we're at the point that our grandchildren will ask us, you were around when BuzzFeed was invented? It's a really different, amazing time. And in spite of that, I think we need to recognize that many news organizations are still telling stories the old way. They are taking print stories and just pasting them in pixels. And I would say, even though a lot of us are coming from the new media world and a lot of us are here because we're from the new media world, the vast majority of the news that is being consumed is just print stories pasted in pixels or television stories pasted in pixels. So I want to quickly show you just a few examples of what we're talking about when we say structured journalism. So here is the old way. And if you think of it like a database, here's a New York Times story, and really this New York Times story has just two fields, headline and text, just two fields. And now here is a PolitiFact fact check. Now here's just three of the fields: speaker, Rush Limbaugh; statement, rating. And now here's a little more from that fact check: speaker, Rush Limbaugh; statement, the date, that's another field; the headline, that's an SEO headline written for search engine optimization; the text of the story; the rating. Then if you look over on the right side of it, the date that he said it is a field, the subject tag is a field, and the sources are all one field. So lots of... Are you guys hearing this? Excellent. All right, great. This is like high technology here. Very cool. All right, and I think we're maybe pretty close to getting started here. All right, so we're just waiting for Federico.
I'm here.
Okay. Great. Put that up on the screen. So I'm going to start with the PowerPoint, and I'm going to use that for a little bit, and then we'll go to Skype as our third speaker. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you to everybody for coming. I am Bill Adair. I am the Knight Professor of Journalism and Public Policy at Duke University. This is my second time at the International Journalism Festival. I came before as the creator of PolitiFact, the fact-checking website in the United States, and I am here also as in that role as the creator, and I continue to be contributing editor to PolitiFact, and I'll be talking a little bit about PolitiFact today. We're going to be talking about new story forms, which is a particular passion of mine and a passion of the other members on our panel. And so I thought I would start by introducing our great panel today, and then give you a little bit of an introduction about new story forms and a concept that we call structured journalism, which is something that has become something of a crusade for several of us, and we hope that you're going to want to join us in this crusade. And we're going to, each of us will make some presentations, and then we'll open it up for some questions from you, and hopefully have an interesting discussion and be a little